Ready, set, and engage. Episode 14. Disclaimer first, the views expressed here are mine and mine alone and do not reflect that of my employer or any organization that I'm affiliated with. Cool. I wanted to cover a couple topics today that have been on my mind. One was the linguistics and nonverbal communication, and that kind of leads right into discipline and especially disciplinary action towards children. And then, of course, the last one is hacking the zipper, which is sort of about traffic. So we'll get there. So, linguistics and nonverbal communication. We've talked before about how there's verbal communication, which is simply the words that are coming out of your mouth, and then there's sort of inflection and nonverbal communication, which are all the different encoding pieces that go into the way that we convey a message. You'll notice my hands are going all over the fucking place, my eyes are moving around. All of these are portions of nonverbal communication. Additionally, the tone that I'm using is a form of nonverbal communication. And so we talked previously about musical theory and how the elongation of a waveform changes the tonality of music, right? And so a bassist tone, sort of a deep droning tone, has a longer wavelength, right? And I don't know if you can watch my Adam's apple here, but if I do sort of a sort of a lower tone, my throat or my Adam's apple will actually go down, and that elongates the period of the wavelength for my vocal cords. Okay, so it's stretching out that wavelength. It's making it visibly longer, but also physically longer, and such it gives a more bassist tone. If you do a high pitched, your Adam's apple actually goes higher, and it shortens your vocal cords such that it's producing a higher pitch or a higher rate of vibration within your vocal cords. Okay, and that's interesting when you start talking about children. Also, when you start talking about animals and just learning and behavior and so on. But so there's this idea, and I think it comes from child language pathology, probably also from some of the learnings from Jean Piaget, who was a very famous doctor that dealt with child rearing and sort of growth of children and early psychology sort of stuff. But basically they say that there's this language that parents adopt or mothers adopt with a newborn baby, right, or with a young child. And basically what happens is when you're communicating with a young child, you'll actually use the higher pitched little voice. Oh, you're so cute. And what you're doing is, one, you're contracting or constraining the length of your vocal cords. You're creating that higher pitch sort of voice. But the other thing that you're doing is you're providing a sense of assimilation. The baby, by physical boundary, has a much smaller range of vocal fluctuation, right? They're basically always high pitched because they're little tiny babies, and so they can't really elongate their Adam's apple because that's a third of their body, right? So instead they tend to have a higher pitched voice. And mothers and sometimes dads, I use it, and people are like, I've never heard your voice that high, and I'm like, I've never paid attention to my voice going that high. But by raising your voice or the pitch of your voice, you're able to communicate at that same sort of resonant frequency as the baby, and thus the baby's able to start to assimilate, hey, I can make those noises, my parent can make those noises, I can thus make the noises my parent's making. And so they start to build language off of that similarity that you're showing by raising the pitch of your voice to sound more like a baby, right? Baby talk winds up coming from the idea that they're trying to mimic the utterances or the phonemes that you're using in communication. And so when you're talking to a baby, you'll raise the pitch of your voice. Okay? That becomes super interesting when you get into discipline, right? And so my favorite realization that I had is my dog picked up a terrible habit. It's not a terrible habit, it's a good habit. He barks when somebody's walking towards our door or when somebody's walking by our house, and it drives me nuts. And so every time he starts just barking out of nowhere, I get grumbling, I'm like, Ziggy, knock it off, right? And I get aggressive in tone, right? What I began to realize is when I get aggressive in tone, he thinks, oh yeah, Dad's aggressive, so I should be aggressive, and so he'll bark more. And it's like, yeah, no, I'm trying to stop you from barking, but I'm getting frustrated. And when I get frustrated, the tone of my voice changes, and now I'm grumbling, right? And so I've had to start to try to retrain myself so that when he's barking at someone, instead of me getting terse and aggressive, I have to be like, okay, Zig, yeah, good job, buddy, good job. Now shut the hell up, you know? And so I had to change the way that I'm encoding my message to him, because he doesn't know what the words I'm using are. He just catches the tone and then plays off of the tone. And so the same sort of idea can apply to children, okay? And so there's this, try having a bowing down, yeah. So there's been a couple of, I don't know if they're quite memes yet, but there's been a couple of posts on Facebook about, you know, disciplining the kid and bringing back spanking and bringing back whooping your kid. And there may be some merit to that. Not like beating the hell out of your kid, because if you do that, I'm not very fond of you. But spanking, okay? So what is spanking? It's a physical punishment that should be sharp in engagement, right? And then ideally be followed by a lesson learned, okay? So with discipline, it's very fascinating because when I was growing up, you know, it was you would get spanked. And so Grandma actually hit or had a fly swatter that was posted up right next to the chair that she ate her lunch in and stuff like that. And let me tell you, if you pissed her off, then you would know it. And she would give you a dirty look, and then she would tell you to go to the chair, and then she'd pull down the fly swatter and whoop your ass. And eventually you learned, like, hey, don't piss Grandma off, you know, don't trespass on Grandma. And so there were like telltale signs of probably like eyebrow raises and oh, what are you doing? And probably tonality changes as well. So when you're talking about discipline, though, if you only learn to spank your child, then you're not using as robust of a framework as you possibly could. So I think I've had to spank Riley maybe once or twice in his entire lifetime. Maddie maybe three or four times. And when I do that, I'm doing assimilation at the same time. Okay, so when you spank the child, you're often mad, frustrated, and your tone of your voice goes down. You're elongating your vocal cords again. You're getting that grumbly, angry voice, and you're saying, "Get over here! You just did something wrong." And then you spank them. Okay. So a couple things are happening. One, you're providing a very concise punishment, concise form of punishment. You're spanking them on their butt. They realize that pain means I did something wrong. That's the discipline portion. The second thing you're doing is, because you're actually changing the tone of your voice, you're associating that tone of your voice and that sort of frustration and engagement style as being the same as that spanking, right? And so eventually, if you've done it right, the spanking can go away and the tone of your voice acts as an equitable form of punishment. So when I get grumbly at my children, they wind up, sometimes crying or getting frightened because Dad's in a bad mood or Dad's grumbling at them. And so the point is, the point is that spanking in and of itself probably isn't as bad as we make it. That doesn't mean beat your kid every day. Instead, it means use that as a device to then create another method by which they can understand that they've done something wrong and there are consequences for it, right? One of the it's really noisy on the street back there. One of the most interesting things is how much the right brain versus the left brain comes into play when you deal with punishment, right? So the moments before you get punished are probably the most scary because your brain's thinking of all the possibilities. There's a very funny quote that comes from almost every mother at some point in their lives, and it scares the shit out of kids, right? Kids are just like, oh, I know I'm in trouble now. And the words are, wait till your father gets home. And as soon as the mom says that, the child goes into, oh man, dad's going to come home and he's going to spank my ass and I'm going to have to hear about it for a week and I'm going to get grounded and all this stuff. And they start building all these possibilities. And the fear is actually probably more punishing than the punishment when dad actually gets home. But it's another one of those pieces, right, where you're adding in another element to punishment that isn't as straightforward and unidimensional as spanking the child. Instead, it's another form of punishment that allows their imagination to actually sort of run away with them, and thus that becomes a part of the punishment, as well as the grumbly voice, which lets you know, hey, you're in trouble, right? Patty probably gives me stink eye when I'm in trouble, like, you're about to get beat up. And so, like, with her, I've got a nonverbal sign that, hey, I'm starting to wear on her nerves or whatever, and I should probably go hide out for a little while, right? And so, so the point is that communication can be a tool, and it can be very, very powerful as a tool, as long as you associate it with the right sort of behavior that you're seeking. For communicating with a baby or a child, that higher pitched thing allows you to communicate and connect on sort of that level that shows them, hey, they're very similar to you and how they can communicate, right? And that's sort of the basis of where you start building language. And then, of course, when you get to the lower end of that spectrum, the more the blinkers just went off, and, like, I don't know. I've angered the gods. When you get sort of that grumbly voice, now all of a sudden you're using nonverbal communication to intimate that you're in trouble or you're frustrated or aggressive, right? And so the dog getting all excited because you're all excited because you're actually yelling at him and he thinks you're yelling at the people outside is sort of that nonverbal communication piece, showing that the tonality of your voice is something that can carry a message not only to humans but also to animals and that which is around us. And so yeah, I thought that was a fun little thought about assimilation and discipline. There was another. This might wind up being a short. Ready, set, engage. Poltergeist. Yeah, definitely, James. The other one that came up today, and I've seen a couple articles that say this, and they're like, hey, when you're dealing with traffic, go all the way to the end of the merging lane because it helps traffic and it allows the maximum number of cars on the road, and so it's the right thing to do because shut the hell up. Like, I understand what they're saying. What they're saying from a functional perspective sort of makes sense until you really tease out what the hell they're saying, and then you're like, you're stupid. Because if everyone rushes all the way to the end and then is forced to merge instead of merging when space allows, then you're creating a bottleneck at the end point. And so it doesn't matter if you do that at the end where the lines actually push you over, or if you do that a quarter mile before because you're being stupid, right? You don't know how to zipper, okay? And think of it this way. When you're dealing with a zipper, like an actual zipper, think of a sleeping bag. Everyone's had a sleeping bag, and they go out and they go camping, and they're like, all right, I got my sleeping bag, I'm going to go zip it up. And as you zip it up too fast, it winds up catching some of the fabric inside, and when it does that, it hangs, and then it doesn't go anywhere, and you have to unzip and rezip and unzip and rezip, and you keep playing this fucking game with the zipper until you realize, oh yeah, if I move this stuff out of the way, allow sufficient space for the zipper to actually merge together, then all of a sudden I'm able to smoothly zip up the sleeping bag and I won't cuss so much, right? Same sort of thing happens with traffic, okay? So if everyone waits until the last minute and then decides, oh, well, because I'm here, that means I get the right of way, then you're always going to deal with that traffic jam. You're always going to deal with the incredibly slow space and the bunch of idiots that make you cuss a lot, because they're disrespectful of you and try and cut in without enough or sufficient space, right? There's always going to be that bottleneck. However, you can fix it. And so I've figured out my strategy to fix it, and it's going to be completely counterintuitive. So the sort of, I guess, natural pattern or natural inclination is, well, if I don't want those people to cut me off, then I get right up on the butt of the person in front of me, so there's insufficient room for them to pull over, and then they can't cut me off. Yeah, unless they're jerks, and then they like sit on the side of the road in the shoulder and keep trying to merge over, or they pass you and try and do the same thing. So what I do in the morning is actually the exact opposite. Instead of getting up so close to the person in front of me that not sufficient vehicles can get over from the merging lane, instead I leave 3 car lanes. Okay? It seems really stupid. It seems really, really stupid. Because there's always going to be some jackass that's like, I'm in a big fancy car, and because I'm in a big fancy car, my time is more important than you, and I'm going to cut over the whatever story you tell. Like, they're a person driving, they're on their way to work, much the same as you. They're at the same time of the day traversing to work, and so you can't really be mad at traffic. It's just sort of a thing that happens from people going and commuting at the same time as you, which is like, how can you be mad at that? I don't know. It's silly, because then you'd have to be mad at yourself for being on the road at that time of the day, and it's counterproductive. Anyway, so instead of being right up on this person, you actually leave about 3 car lengths, okay? And you just sort of pace them out. So as they're moving, you're moving, you leave that space wide open. And what happens is the idea of reciprocity. There's this beautiful unspoken piece of psychology that comes into play, because if you leave 3 spaces open, this lane will actually slow down. And yeah, every now and then you'll get 1 or 2 people that cut in front of you, one that's supposed to merge, and then another one that's like, oh, I'm cool and awesome. But the majority of the time, there's only 1 person that gets in front of you, and then the next person actually lines up behind you and merges at an appropriate interval. And the person behind them, they see what you're doing, and they take that as oh, this is what I should be doing, and then they leave about 3 car spaces for you. So you can actually fix traffic. Now, granted, only for a little period of time, because eventually it'll sort of die off as people go back to their natural inclination of bumper to bumper. But you can actually fix traffic in the morning by leaving 3 intervals, or 3 car intervals between you and the car in front of you next to a merge lane. It's that same idea of a zipper on a sleeping bag, only the zipper on the sleeping bag has been perfectly managed to say, this is how big this side is, this is how big this side is, and when they get together, they lock really nicely. Well, that's well and good in a controlled system, but since you don't know how well that person drives, how good their brakes are, how alert they are this morning, then you need to add a buffer, right? And that buffer is just sort of your safety net. So you put in 3 car intervals. I realize they would be able to get in with less, but that leaves you that buffer zone of, yeah, I really don't trust you, and if you hit your brakes, then I want to have sufficient time to stop. And so by leaving that buffer, one, you're allowing them to come in easily. You're preventing the stop and go inherent in those merge lanes, and you're also providing yourself a buffer so that you can do a bit of defensive driving and dodge out if you have to, or allow sufficient time to brake. And so from a defense perspective, it's a magical interval. From a just trying to get to work in the morning, it's freaking magical. And from a psychology perspective, it's mind-blowing. Like, I'll do it, and everyone in front of me is bumper to bumper, and when I do that, the people behind me start doing that same interval, and stuff just moves, right? And so the problem we have is we developed this strategy, and we decided, oh, people can't get in front of me because I got to get to work, and my time's most important. But if we loosen that up a little bit and say, hey, they're on their way to work, I'm on my way to work, we're going at the same time, and so like we're all sort of in this together by being on the freeway at the same time, and we allow that room for them to merge, stuff just starts to work, right? And so, yeah, I thought that was fun. There was another news article today, or another article today that said, merging at the last second saves space on the freeway, which is this stupid idea, or this elementary idea that, well, yeah, if you're dealing with a finite amount of space, like a finite lane length on the freeway, then getting you all the way to the end of it allows maximum amount of cars to stack in that lane within the freeway. That doesn't mean it makes this merge any better. In fact, you as soon as you start to make that shuffle happen, you'll realize that it doesn't frickin' work if everyone's driving for their own intent. But if they're driving as a, hey, we're in this together and trying to get to our works, our destinations, similar to the next person, then lo and behold, stuff can actually work. And so that every time I see that article, I get a little bit irritated because it totally oversimplifies the entire idea. But so that's a hack for today on how to make traffic a little bit easier in the morning. I think those were the 3 topics I had today, which actually went pretty quick. The linguistics and nonverbal communication related to the tone of voice, which is like as you elongate the vocal cords, you'll see that Adam's apple drop, and that basis tone is actually a longer wavelength generated by your vocal cords, which allow your pitch to go down. When you're talking to a child, you actually raise your pitch to sound more like them, which is a shorter vocal cord length, and thus a higher frequency of communication, or higher frequency of the sound that's coming out. Discipline and how assimilation allows you to take and begin to draw a correlation or a relationship between two things that otherwise might just be stimuli, right? Which is the stern voice to say, hey, child, you've angered me and you're not listening to me, and then associate that with the discipline of a spanking or whatever form of discipline you pick, such that now this is associated with that, and that carries the same gravity and weight of the stronger discipline, right? And then of course hacking the zipper, how to deal with traffic a little bit better, and life's a garden, dig it. Hacking the zipper, how to use human behavior and psychology to make the commute just a little bit easier and make that zipper line a little bit easier to deal with in the morning. So those are my 3 topics. That's all I got. That's Ready, Set, and Engage, episode 14. Thank you so much for watching.